This video is brought to you by G Fuel. Off the back of the last arc, the Chunin exams, I was ready to dive into more material almost immediately, and just like last week, with the completion of this week's batch of manga volumes, I can finally admit that the story of Naruto has defeated me. I now want to read the series all the time, and because of that, I now fear the day that will eventually inevitably come where I will have to stop reading Naruto. The first arc acted as a brilliant introduction to the characters, themes, and familiarized myself with Kishimoto in a way that heightened my enjoyment. The second arc elevated all of that material in ways that felt both natural and exciting while uncovering a lasting evil in the series. But in this arc, the scope of Naruto exploded with more characters, lore, and potential than I ever anticipated. I think I'm finally starting to understand why Naruto became the cultural icon it is today. A main feature of this story, and indeed its world since I began covering it, has been the Hokage, their history, what they represent, what they've done, and who will next be selected as the 5th Hokage. Given that the 4th died long before this series began in a battle to save the Earth, and that the 3rd is now very old and sort of in the clutches of Orochimaru, facing almost certain death, the selection of the 5th Hokage is up in the air and of vital importance to secure the village's future, and thus are the circumstances and stakes heading into this video's material. And speaking of which, I think this might be the best opening an arc has received since I started reading. Effectively, the world Naruto's grown up in is suddenly plunged into chaos and ruin. While the first 2 arcs, Land of Waves and the Chunin exams, began in absolute stability, this one begins in utter chaos. The very best of the best are being backed up against the wall, all the while Naruto, Sakura, and Shikamaru are being ordered to chase after Sasuke to stop him from overextending himself, with the expressed order that, once they achieve their assignment, they need to wait for further instructions. I can only imagine the anxiety that would flow through me if I was assigned something like that, effectively being asked to run from home on a rescue mission of sorts, not knowing if I'll ever return to see my community in the same state ever again. There's such unbelievably high stakes with the entire infrastructure of this world hanging in the balance. It's such an unbelievably effective attention-grabbing opener that flows brilliantly from the abrupt conclusion to the Chunin exams prior. Furthermore, I can absolutely appreciate why pursuing Gaara is immensely important to the likes of Sasuke on a narrative level. And it all ties back to his foundational motivations from the 1st and 2nd chapters. Sasuke's expressed interest before the Chunin exams even began was to fight worthy adversaries to increase his strength and proficiency as a ninja. This is to, of course, accomplish his one goal, to kill his brother. Knowing that his brother is much stronger than him, Sasuke needs to be as sure as he can possibly be, once he does eventually track him down, that he has the strength to do what he wants. And so, Gaara is a new focus. Why? Because Gaara is the first training ninja in the history of the exams to finish the Forest of Death in that time frame and without sustaining any damage. In other words, Gaara at this point is stronger than Sasuke's brother was when he underwent this challenge. Of course, assuming he underwent this challenge. And so, proving to himself that he can defeat Gaara is a great indicator of how strong Sasuke is relative to his brother at this point in his life. And the eventual pursuit of Sasuke by the likes of Naruto, Shikamaru, and Sakura is really fun, incorporating a diverse number of characters, not limited to Gaara himself eventually. But of the battles leading up to that effort, Shikamaru's is the best, I think. Working in a very similar fashion to his prior conflict during the Chunin exams against another of the Sand Village's best and brightest, he's really won me over with his relaxed, laid-back, and calculated approach to everything, formulating a plan of action in seconds against the pursuing bad guys, all within a frenzied panic. Furthermore, Shikamaru, during this sequence, brought to my attention an in-universe explanation that excuses for me one of the most irritating aspects of modern and classic anime. With this shadow-possessing power, there's now an in-universe reason for people to stand around blustering and talking their hearts out with no action, thanks to his special shadow ability. But that's not the only fight that starts taking place towards the beginning of this section. It's time for Orochimaru versus the 3rd Hokage, Hiruzen. When I first started reading this fight, one of the things I didn't expect to show its face were the levels of sentimentality it ended up brandishing. There are some powerful moments of reflection on behalf of Hiruzen himself, with his confrontations against his resurrected masters, all the while he's forced to contend with his one-time star pupil Orochimaru. And when you lay out the material like that, it's easy to see the obvious opportunities for emotional connection. But the way this fight paces itself and dishes out fascinating exposition both about Orochimaru as a child, his relationships with Hiruzen, and of course the history of Hiruzen himself as a youth, you can't help but feel that much more invested and connected to these characters, not to mention the world they're involved with. The story in question is called Naruto, but this fight, while having little to nothing to do with that character, stands on its own 2 feet and breathes new life into the story. The action itself, although feeling less like ninjutsu now and more like elemental bending on the scale of Avatar: The Last Airbender, provides more spectacle than pretty much anything we've seen before this point, and it reminded me of how old Hiruzen really must be now. Like many different stories both from the East and the West, the older mentor character is a stereotype that depicts someone as decrepit one moment, while in another moment showing everyone else up. In Naruto, while this is still somewhat true with this character, it doesn't romanticize the toll aging has had on the great third Hokage, with time itself and the passage of it being a major focus of this conflict between these two characters. Orochimaru breaking established rules and laws, extending his youth beyond what is natural, and Hiruzen accepting his decline, fighting better than anyone we've ever seen in the series, forced to fight and defeat his former masters, the first and second Hokages, all the while taking out Orochimaru as a threat, albeit at the cost of his own life. It's clearly an emotionally charged affair, given that at first he's mostly on the defensive, which Orochimaru points out at the beginning is really unlike him. It's honestly a remarkable show of force that helps to put into perspective how absurdly powerful he must have been in his prime, given that this is him now, taking some of Orochimaru's absolute best, and while he does die, losing the battle, he secures the safety of those around him for the time being, eliminating Orochimaru's ability to weave signs, thus in essence, winning the war. The most effective and I think perhaps the most important aspect looking to the future concerning this fight, however, might be that of what we learn about Orochimaru in these flashes to the past. How he was hoping to be the 4th Hokage and failed in meeting the requirements, and now he seeks to have all the knowledge of all the different styles, granting himself eternal youth in the process. Overall, from an aesthetics perspective, this fight was visually beautiful in the manga, and in the anime, the animation only served to elevate that material. I particularly enjoyed the back and forth Hiruzen had with his former masters. The special effects animation on display for mudslides, fire and water, there's so much stunning movement coating that episode. I do, however, have one small criticism of this fight. While it's perfectly natural for Orochimaru to remain something of an unknown going into this encounter, Hiruzen, the 3rd Hokage, felt still unfamiliar to me despite his presence in the beginning of this story. And due to this, the narrative had to dedicate substantial sections to exploring Hiruzen as well as Orochimaru. That's not a deal breaker at all, however, and what narrative exposition there is, I still relatively enjoyed. I mean, the entire purpose of this fight at the end of the day was to give us a history lesson and build up the world further, so it succeeded in that effort, crescendoing on a powerful and intense moment as the 3rd Hokage sacrifices himself to rid the world of a great evil, one last time protecting the people he cares for deeply by removing Orochimaru's abilities, which I am only now realizing is another very similar narrative move to Avatar: The Last Airbender. I'm getting a feeling they might have taken some notes from Naruto in this respect. And while this fight did bookend this section of the story, the real meat of the conflict, proving to have spectacle to rival that of even the Hokage level threat here, was that of Naruto versus Gaara. Naruto versus Gaara. The showdown between Gaara and the various characters that try to stop him is brilliant, beginning with the closest in pursuit of the young man, Sasuke, our favorite little moody boy, and their dynamic is interesting, for me mainly because it's between two people with hateful motivations. Sasuke attempts his 3rd and possible suicidal attack, willing to throw his life away at the chance to proceed ever closer to his one single-minded goal. All the while, Gaara, a once small reserved child, now more closely resembles a monster. Grotesque, his body, face, and being contorts to form an accurate representation of the hatred and suffering inside his mind. I like that in making this decision, Sasuke began to once again succumb to the curse of Orochimaru, and just as he's being overcome by it and facing the finishing blow from this new monstrous Gaara, Naruto makes the save. with this save being perhaps metaphorical or emblematic of what's to come for Sasuke and Naruto, that Naruto will in the future save him from himself. And once Naruto arrives, we recognize that exact same conflict cloud his mind and cause that very same hesitancy. Only once before have we seen Naruto freeze up, and since then it's been pretty smooth sailing. The source of his determination and bravery has always been that, regardless of the opponent, he knows that he's willing to go further, to push himself more than they are. And to him, at this point in his life, that's all he has. He doesn't believe in or rely on what comes naturally to him like Sasuke does, and he doesn't believe in his intelligence the same way Sakura or Shikamaru would. And really, it's easy to see why. He's never been told to believe in those facets of himself, and as a result, has only tested himself in the realms of his own determination. He wants to achieve his goals so badly that he's willing to push himself farther than anyone he knows. That's where his confidence comes from, and that specifically is what makes Gaara an interesting and imposing character for Naruto to face. Consumed by the demon inside him, Naruto is not only facing someone who he knows is willing to die fighting, willing to struggle as hard as he will, but he's also face to face with a manifestation of a reality that could have been his own, and in many ways still could be. Like Gaara, he has a demon inside of him, and this fear causes him to hesitate, further putting his friends in danger. The seeds for this encounter were sown in the prior arc as we slowly began to understand who Gaara was and what he was all about. And with this final showdown between two sides of effectively the same coin, we got another perspective. Having been depicted as a monster and showing all of his personality defects, we receive a flashback to Gaara's past, and in it, the first panel displays Gaara sitting on a swing alone, looking on as other kids his age are having fun. Remind you of anyone? The flashback itself is short, but it certainly paints a lonely, tragic, and harrowing picture of what it must have been like as Gaara growing up in a world that both feared and despised him. Coming to a head with the only person in his life choosing to make an attempt on his own life, marking the point where he would become the person he is today. The reasons I love battle shonen as a genre are numerous. However, as I was watching this climactic final battle between two giant kaiju in a ninja-themed story about believing in yourself, I was reminded of one specific reason. The genre allows you to place incredible philosophical, symbolic, or thematic weight behind the various techniques that are implemented in it. To show you what I mean, I'll use Dragon Ball as an example, given that it's the story I'm most familiar with. Towards the beginning of Dragon Ball Z, the events of the Saiyan saga get underway. Goku dies, his son's kidnapped by his arch-nemesis, and aliens invade and take over the world. It's pretty standard stuff. And just like this arc in Naruto, where we see a giant frog slice a sand monster with a sword, the visuals and craziness of the Saiyan saga, what with its giant monkey monsters, massive beam struggles, and depiction of the afterlife, gave it more than enough eye candy to put on a wild show. But the reason that this arc was successful had much more to do with the simple story that was being told at its foundation, and how the actions of the main characters reflected the philosophies that they represented. When Vegeta arrives, he doesn't show affection for his allies or anyone really. In fact, he kills his oldest comrade the second he's no longer useful to him. In this way, Vegeta acts as the opposite of what Goku represents in the story. Having given up his life at the beginning of the arc to save literally everyone, Goku travels to Otherworld and after exerting more effort than any mortal in history across Snake Way, requests the help of someone he has never met so that he can continue to defend others. And once he touches down on the battlefield, having been brought back by his friends, he finds himself as the one thing standing between everything he cares about and certain annihilation, all with the technique that he managed to acquire thanks to the philosophy he believed in. In this way, Battle Shonen has facilitated not only a beam struggle, but a struggle of ideology, between ego and humility. The beam struggle wasn't a cornerstone moment in a battle that has gone down in history as one of the greatest of all time simply because it looked visually interesting. Absolutely not. It's because of what it represents. And so, across the series, techniques like the Spirit Bomb, Kaioken, and Kamehameha didn't just look cool. Through their acquisition or connection to the story, they each represented a part of Goku's identity. And in that same way, during this battle with Gaara, Naruto's philosophy and way of life is challenged directly by his natural opposite in Gaara. And to combat this natural opposing threat, Naruto uses the techniques that represent who he is and what makes him a terrific character. After overcoming the initial shock that came from confronting a demented and psychotic version of himself, early on in the conflict, a tried and true means of building up tension to a big reveal took place. Gaara would knock Naruto to the floor, berating him and poking what he saw as holes in his idealistic and hopeful outlook on life, but time and time again, Naruto would stand back up. And as I pointed out in his flashback, Gaara's struggle has been about his lack of belief in others' ability to love him. He refuses to trust in anyone and so lives only for himself, hurting others maybe before they had the chance to hurt him. There are numerous stages where Gaara slips up and Naruto manages to land a significant hit before he eventually runs out of chakra to help anymore. And realizing this, Sasuke stands up for him and tries to create an opening to allow both him and Sakura to escape. In response to this, Naruto throws out a beautiful quote. When people are protecting someone truly precious to them, they truly can become as strong as they must be. All the while assuming the same pose he did when he was standing up for Iruka in chapter 1, Naruto explodes with chakra, resulting in a very similar scene and page spread. This is the technique that represents the love his friends have for him and the love he has for them. It's the manifestation of Naruto's desire to protect those he loves. The perfect thematic counter to Gaara's hateful and lonely perspective that's haunted him his entire life. But that's not even the best part. As I said, there's a giant frog versus giant sand monster kaiju battle. And even here, this same narrative approach is present with stunning effectiveness. I would even argue to greater effect as Gaara makes decisions that make this contrast even more pronounced. Naruto's summoning of Gamabunta is a very important touch Kishimoto added to make this picture as effective as it ends up being. If we want to break this down, Gamabunta and Naruto's ability to summon him in the first place is directly tied to the Fox Spirit's chakra, which was only now possible to access thanks to Jiraiya granting Naruto the agency to make his own destiny by removing the seal that blocked this chakra. Naruto now summons Gamabunta because he has the control to make the Fox Spirit work for him, which happens to be the exact opposite of Gaara's ace in the hole, wherein he effectively surrenders all the agency he has to the Sand Spirit by falling unconscious, thus unlocking the full power of this spirit. And so, when described like that, the scene, while we can acknowledge on a surface level how much is visually happening on screen, I mean, come on, look, there's a giant frog wearing clothes and a sword, while it has a lot going on, if you look at what this story is about, it becomes much more simple and effective. It's not just a crazy monster battle with the fate of the known world on the line, it's Naruto using the good that he's received in his life to try and reach Gaara, someone that's fallen so far from reality, and boy, does Naruto reach him. This is the natural end to the major conflict of this arc, with Gaara out for the count, destruction after coming to an end in their village, and the Hokage after losing his life during the battle with Orochimaru. The progression into the next arc feels seamless. Something I've criticized Dragon Ball Super in the past for was how little the arcs themselves flowed into each other. Everything felt as though it had a clearly defined and cut ending, which can be okay for some people, but for me, I much prefer when the events of the prior story inform the next. It creates a believable cause and effect, and furthermore injects a great sense of scale to the occasion. And this is true for Naruto in this instance. For everything that's transpired, it's the consequences of the prior arc that inform the events of this one.
5代目火影は今すぐにでも必要だ。そして昨日火の国の大名と設けた緊急会議で地雷や。それがお前に決まった。おあいにくさま、わしはそんな柄じゃないの。
Jiraiya is such a lovely character, quirky and light. From the beginning I saw a very Naruto sort of energy within him, reinforced perfectly in this section by the imagery of his training days. And it's this position, the 5th Hokage looking to be filled, that this arc most concerns itself with. This upcoming arc concerns itself with answering predominantly 2 questions. What does it mean to be Hokage, and who will be the 5th? And on this journey, we follow Jiraiya and Naruto as they set out to find Tsunade, one of the 3 great shinobi touted by Jiraiya himself as being perfect for the job. The story feels well thought out, and the events within it are thrilling. So, let's jump into it. We tend to run at least 1 ad a week on this channel to support the production of these videos. It allows me to do what I love, and I get to employ the wonderful people behind the scenes who help keep things running smoothly, make my life much easier, and in turn make these videos much better for you guys. The companies we work with on these ads tend to send us a massive list of talking points, and while we'll always touch on the ones we believe in and support, it can get very tiresome and we seldom get to be creative. G Fuel are a huge exception to this rule. Not once have they ever given us any kind of brief. They leave everything up to us, and as I'm sure you've noticed, that's resulted in the most extravagant and fun content we've ever made for sponsors. I mean, they let us make an ad where I dressed as Jesus, sprinkled their G Fuel formula onto a man's pregnant wife, turning her into a bunch of G Fuel products. I got to parody Harry Potter and rename Rubius Hagrid to Putius Energy Grid. We've done the most ridiculous, ludicrous stuff, and they have been nothing but supportive. And because of this, I would love to keep working with them, and that of course hinges on how well these ads perform. So if you love these kooky skits and you're interested in legitimately delicious energy drinks, and I do mean legitimate, they are delicious, click the link in the description and grab some today. They're a household name for a reason, and I hope you enjoy their stuff as much as I do.
Cette fois, c'est le garçon qui débarrasse.
Pas de panique.
Alors, contente les filles?
En ce moment, Naruto est chez McDonald's et Shippy aussi.
During their travels to find Tsunade, Jiraiya gives Naruto specific training that is quite advanced. It involves chakra manipulation in 3 separate steps. I found this section very fun, but within it I began to realize something. Recently in the story, it's felt, at least from an optical point of view from other characters, that Naruto has undergone a fairly significant change. A sudden realization has occurred that he is in fact destined not for mediocrity, but instead something significant. It flips the script on the character in a sense, but I don't necessarily think in a bad way. The journey from his birth through the land of waves all the way through to the end of the Chunin exams has been in many ways completed. He was an insecure kid without a place in the world, and through great hardship overcame any falsehood he may have believed either about himself or others. His goal to become the next Hokage, while still unachieved, it was a goal set by him to show the world that not only is some loser kid worth something, but is capable of achieving the highest rank in the land. In other words, he was determined to make something of himself despite what others might have thought. But with his travels having yielded surprising changes in his mindset and outlook as seen during the Gaara fight, he now has no reason to have such a chip on his shoulder. He's proven himself not only strong to the people who care about him, but most importantly, himself. And so, strictly speaking, in a sense, this emotional journey for him as a character is over. He spent the entire story trying to prove his worth and reliability to various people in his life, and now that he has that, Kishimoto then decided to give him more promise and responsibility than any other character in the series.
Hello. Do you have a moment to talk about our Lord and Savior?
For the entire series, Naruto has wanted to be this person. And now we get to see how he fares when the crippling pressure of this responsibility becomes a reality. And he would have lost, died, or had been taken away by Itachi had it not been for the likes of Sasuke coming to save him, or eventually Jiraiya. And thus, one of the main takeaways from this encounter ends up being Naruto, once again, wasn't ready. The poor kid was just about figuring out how the world as he knew it worked growing up, and now everything is suddenly changing. However, thankfully, the last few arcs have helped him grow, and unlike last time he found himself unsure, he has something and someone to fight for. The training that Naruto undergoes has specific emphasis on this philosophy, to find self-reliantness and master a technique in stages with as little help as possible. Jiraiya, totally aware of this, forces Naruto to self-soothe and teach himself, offering up a collection of scenes that feel both intimate and enlightening for us as an audience to sit back and watch. Seeing his struggles, his injuries, and flashes back into the past to gain deeper insight into the workings of what he's doing was wonderful to experience. Seeing his doubt, his frustration, and the pain he goes through to achieve this frankly incredible feat in such a short amount of time stands in direct contrast with the likes of Goku, who seem to manage incredible feats of strength with comparative ease. These training sequences with Jiraiya highlight something integral to the progression of this character and really this story, I think, for me. It highlights, or rather points out, that despite the shift in value people now see in Naruto, with him effectively being a great significance, he's still the same kid struggling and trying his best to succeed against all of this pressure. And that's really what this entire second half following the death of the third Hokage is about. Responsibility. And how different characters with different backgrounds react to sudden or long existing responsibility. Orochimaru, and in a smaller way for now, Itachi are the forces of pressure being applied to this world, forcing, as I've explained, the likes of Naruto to improve and train. But these themes are also explored with the likes of Jiraiya and even Tsunade to meaningful degrees. With the position of 5th Hokage requiring someone to fill it, both Jiraiya and Tsunade are faced with that responsibility. Jiraiya almost immediately shifts the responsibility to Tsunade, and in doing that is forced to accept the responsibility of training Naruto and locating Tsunade, who he thinks is a better fit. Speaking of which, Tsunade on the other hand is a much more interesting character with this line of thought. While Jiraiya made his decision based on little more than his own assessment of him not being right for the job, Tsunade is faced with the dilemma of which his options directly conflict with each other. Save the village by becoming the 5th Hokage, or assure the village's destruction by helping Orochimaru. And to be honest, there's no more interesting character to force this dilemma upon than her. From the moment we hear about her to the moment we meet her, we're painted a picture of a person who just runs away from responsibility, only living for herself and what she wants. And now she's faced with what would effectively be something she can never turn back from. And in exchange for denying the responsibility that comes with being the 5th Hokage, Orochimaru offers an alternative: to reanimate her loved ones. This obviously represents the ultimate want in her life, and so when she's faced with the offer of responsibility the 5th Hokage comes with, she immediately declines, much to Naruto's astonishment and anger, further emphasized by her dismissal of the 4th Hokage's sacrifice, citing it as a foolhardy thing to have done. This was such a satisfying scene, a clash of two literal opposing ideologies, one who is willing to do anything to achieve the status of Hokage, and one who thinks it's pointless, punctuated by a short but philosophically rich fight outside, one where Tsunade chose not to use more than her fingernail, and to great effect she uses it, but, and this is the best part, the responsibility Naruto represents in this conflict makes itself known through the technique he's been training. The responsibilities that he's adopted during this training session, the technique that represents this responsibility, shocked Tsunade and gives her an idea. Let Naruto train 1 week, and if he can master the Rasengan, she'll say he's deserving of becoming Hokage, in addition to giving him her grandfather's necklace. And if he fails, she takes all his money. What makes this timeline specifically interesting is that it also happens to coincide with the time Orochimaru wants an answer to his offer from Tsunade. The means with which these two stories, Naruto's as well as Tsunade's, intertwine and inform each other is both natural and fascinating. There's a wonderful scene where Tsunade's friend Shizune brings Naruto and us up to speed concerning Tsunade's tragic past filled with loss and terror. Seeing this allows us to empathize much more readily with her, but for Naruto, it only invigorates him. Right before she tells Naruto about her backstory, he complains that she's stopping him from getting the rest he needs to train tomorrow. However, after this conversation, he informs her that he's going off to train immediately. This search for Tsunade's section of the story is the absolute best Naruto has been for me as both a reviewer and a fan of shonen storytelling. Over the first 115 chapters, while they did shine a light on the themes of determination and responsibility, they were never the focus quite like they are in this arc. Because Naruto is such a brilliantly fleshed out and fully realized character, instead of having to dedicate time within the story to serve his character to bolster these traits, his character can now be used to service the story for this reason, to represent the themes of determination and responsibility. And in using him this way, Kishimoto managed to help me build a powerful connection and relationship with the character of Tsunade. Throughout this arc, she's been quite honestly a turbulent character, one that's caused a tremendous amount of conflict in the story, and in this final portion, she confronts Orochimaru and she decides to take the more difficult option. In the face of everything Orochimaru is offering, she says no. And that journey from feeling indifferent or ambivalent to feeling true responsibility for not just herself or her friends, but for her entire village, she feels a responsibility to become what they need her to be, and right here you can feel as though the story is building up to a specific point, to something special. Naruto certainly plays his role in this battle by demonstrating the value of self-belief, determination, and responsibility in the face of certain doom, and in doing so, like he has shown hints of at numerous points in the series, despite performing incredible feats that pale in comparison to the power Kabuto possesses, he manages to inspire belief in these ideas for those around him. And that's when we see that all of the focus and effort that Kishimoto has put into this story converge into one point, a point that he has built up and it's this. This moment honestly gave me chills. To have an entire arc a character has undergone be so succinctly punctuated and presented in one sentence, all the while demonstrating in such a visually stunning way, Kishimoto sir, fantastic work. From this point on, the rest is action movie window dressing, but even so, the battle with their summoned spirits with all three of the shinobi greats was intense and satisfying. I loved watching Orochimaru getting beat in the end too, by the way, but really it was the quieter moments that have stayed with me in this story more than anything else. There's a minor visual gag during this material that I knew had a lot of potential for emotional resonance. Tsunade's insistence on appearing young, using her chakra to manipulate the way she looks, changing herself from a 50-something-year-old woman to one that looks as though she's in her 20s. I thought that this was an interesting idea for two reasons. Firstly, I liked that it immediately helped to reveal what sort of temperament she had and where her values lay, but also because I thought it reflected her character's biggest flaw. The story of Tsunade is one of a troubled soul trapped in the past, filled with resentment, unable to move on from the horrible losses she suffered during that part of her life. I thought it served as a brilliant metaphor for her current mindset and beliefs in the beginning of this part of the story. And when the ending came, that powerful realization and life-altering shift in mindset, so too did her barriers for throwing her life away for a cause worth the sacrifice. And symbolically, after exhausting herself completely in a desperate and powerful effort to save everyone and rise up to become the 5th Hokage, her illusion fell, revealing her actual self. Free of illusion, it's a beautiful touch that really sealed this as such a phenomenal arc for me. It was simple, had a clear message, and was powerful in its execution. In essence, it was focused. It managed to harness everything I loved about this story and in the process created a fantastic character that happened to be female. I've been vocal about my issues with the likes of Ino and Sakura, but I'm also willing to point out a job well done when I see it. Tsunade is a great character that had a brilliant arc in this story, and with the 5th Hokage now after being selected and accepted, Orochimaru still on the run, and a massive world of possibilities ahead, I can confidently say that I am thrilled I picked up this series, and I cannot wait to see what lies ahead of us on this wild and inspirational adventure. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see more reviews of Naruto like this, and if you don't want to miss an upload. But until then, I've been Totally Not Mark. I'll see you all next week, and thank you so much for watching.